patiently waiting for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I greatly appreciate it. And I want to thank you, the NC staff, and everyone who has helped get this bill to this critical point in the process. And I do appreciate it. And I appreciate you, Administrator Wareham, for being here as well today. The current EPA has made new source review reform a priority. I share this priority and appreciate your comments on my legislation today. I've heard from folks in my district as well as industries here in a previous hearing how complicated and burdensome this program is, and it was singled out multiple times in the Department of Commerce's report on regulatory burdens for domestic manufacturing. That being said, I have a story in my own district which I think brings home the need for this reform. It doesn't cause a lot of pollution or any pollution at all, but what we have is a manufacturer of furniture. And when touring that manufacturer of furniture, who was, it was the Vaughn Bassett company that was the subject of Factory Man, the fight of John Bassett to keep American furniture going when it looked like China and the Asians were going to chase us out of the marketplace. And he did a great job. But I'm touring his factory, and there's a conveyor belt that runs down and runs back, and there's nothing out there. And they've built ramps to get back over it again on the other side. And I said to him at the time, 5 or 6 years ago when I was first touring it, I said, "What's this here for?" "Oh, we got some regulation. If we change it, we have to redo everything. So we have this conveyor belt that goes out to nowhere and comes back. And it's not efficient, but we don't want to deal with it." In checking to make sure it was new source review before I came to this hearing, we checked on this last week. They had to check with their regulatory guy who handles all this because they're not really sure. They just know they can't touch it. Goes to nowhere. Adds time to the production of the pieces of furniture. They don't use what the original purpose was, but they have to keep the conveyor belt going. That affects their factory. And let me detail from the book how I know it affects their factory. So he's getting heavy competition from the Chinese, and he's going to have to do something about it. He's taking apart one of the pieces they're doing to see what they're doing more efficiently than what he's doing in his factory. And as it states in this book by Beth Macy, in his sweat-stained golf hat, John Bassett stood atop a conveyor belt and told his workers he had no intention of closing the factory. Bassett asked his workers to not only work faster, but also suggest ideas for factory floor improvements. What he didn't want to hear, what he never wants to hear, was the phrase, "It can't be done." If something was wrong with a machine and it was slowing production down, the workers should personally let him know. That conveyor belt is slowing down that process. That conveyor belt means his factory is less efficient. It gets fewer pieces of furniture out every day than it might otherwise be able to do. That conveyor belt is a part of the problem, and the new source review keeps him from changing that conveyor belt because they're afraid that the EPA will whisk in on changing that conveyor belt and make them comply with every new standard that's come about since whenever it was they put their process in place. Instead of being able to make small improvements along the way or even change this conveyor belt, they can't get it done because this regulation is too burdensome. So burdensome they had to even go check with the regulatory guy to find out for sure that that was the rule that caused the problem, and it was. I'm not going to tell Mr. Bassett it can't be done. We need to change this rule, and I appreciate your help in that regard. Do you disagree with anything I've just said?
I do not.
And I appreciate that. You know, we've heard a lot about electric generation and other things today, and I've just told you this story. But, you know, whatever it is, can you speak to what the EPA is doing on its own? I mean, I think a bill is the best way to do it, but what's the EPA doing on its own to try to reform NSR?
So a couple comments. First of all, thank you very much for what you're doing, Mr. Congressman. As you know, I've spent a lot of time on this program in my career. It's a very high priority of mine to make it better, and I appreciate your efforts. I think your example highlights an important aspect of NSR, which is it applies to everybody who emits stuff, not just power plants, not just petroleum refineries. So a big reason why we need to improve the program is for the furniture makers of the world and the brick plants of the world and the small businesses and the small entities and facilities that grapple with this on a daily basis. We at EPA are working very hard, you know, within the authority we have to improve the program through rule changes and interpretations and policy memos, and we're going to continue to try as long as I'm here.
Well, and I'm glad that we agree that narrow and targeted NSR is necessary, but that we need to make some reforms. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlemen, time expired.